in fact, that the migration isn't just going west and north, it's also going south, and it's also causing problems in countries south of the Sahel as well. So we seem to be emptying, I say we, I'm talking about Western, and we'll see why I say this in a second. Western influences seem to be emptying this region of young men. And the question is why? Well, I don't really have an answer right now, but I just want to highlight once again who is operating in this area. It is obviously China's Belt and Road is in there. The EU is very interested in this area. But if we think about NGOs, it's mainly the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, who is really keen on a new path forward for the Sahel. And now Tony Blair spoke about this on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference in 2019 or 2018, can't remember which. And so this is a very key policy area for him. And Alex, I was just interested to get your views on this, because you look at discussion of immigration and how people are being moved and people trafficking from this part of Africa, and almost never is the fact that similar numbers of people are being moved southwards mentioned. It's almost never mentioned. And there's clearly a policy interest amongst big NGOs and governments in this part of Africa. And so while it's impacting Europe in a particular way, we really got to try to work out what's the root cause that's driving this in the first place.
Yes, of course, geopolitical news is written up, especially in the English-speaking world. Evelyn Waugh put it best in his 1930s novel Scoop. He has one of his characters say that what counts as news is that which a man or a chap person uninterested in the world affairs would raise an eyebrow at. That's not an exact quote, but you're packaging it to casual readers, right? So in this particular case, if you were to report Africa internal migration problems, shanty towns, people will just think, oh, that's Africa. But if you report pressure on Europe, then people will have a completely different set of narrative ideas in their head. The more left-wing ones will have their heartstrings tugged. It's all our fault. We're too rich. The right-wing ones will be provoked towards sort of Colonel Blimp attitude of get these out of here. But of course, it ruins the narrative if you actually point out that a particular part of Africa is having a particular dynamic, pushing its people out. And this does indeed go back a long way. Eleanor Roosevelt, in her long decades of widowhood after the US President Roosevelt died just before the end of the Second World War, in her book On My Own, she goes into this in some detail and I think recounts how just before the end of the war, Roosevelt, to the chagrin of Churchill, in fact, insisted on seeing the Sultan of Morocco, who was then only a titular ruler under the French. And it seems that he told the Sultan of Morocco, I'm sure you'll find great resources of water under your territory. Don't let any conglomerates steal these from you, and let this be a long-term strategy for your country. So it was seen back even then. And just to close that, I would say, if you look at the quite rapidly changing section at the bottom of our ukcolumn.org homepage called Stories We're Watching, one of the ones that's currently on there is Defense One, one of the very good Washington-based geopolitical and defense issue coverers. There's a headline that we link to at the moment called French and American Special Forces Agree to Beef Up Partnership in Africa. Now, I'd suggest that, well, you should be watching and reading Ice Age Farmer and Adapt 2030 anyway. But whenever you see Africa in geopolitical mainstream news, read Sahel. It's a particular part of Africa with oil and more particularly massive underground water resources. And that's the part that's being cleared. So it's not black-white issue. It's within Africa. They can notice in those countries around Congo and Kenya what's going on as well. That zone is being cleared out for what will probably be a three-way punch-up between China, Russia, and the Anglo-American West.
Indeed. And just very briefly, Alex, of course, one of the things that's driving this is Islamic insurgency, which we have seen in Syria and other places. We've seen a lot of Western money going into support over the last 10 years.
Yes, it's a very obscure area, but those, for example, who've been following the issue of religious persecution in the Sahel countries, notably northern Nigeria and central Nigeria, and this applies more widely, by the way, these people are very eloquent in English and French. They have their own proper TV channels. It's not the 1960s. You can easily find online Africans speaking eloquently about their own stuff, and interpreting the world and their own part of the world in good English and French. So you don't need to rely on Western journalists, but absolutely the issue, particularly I've seen in Nigeria, if you speak to locals, for example, church leaders, local council people, they will say these problems came in overnight. They had no root in our previous history. There was no previous form of African Islam or Christianity that gave rise to the communal violence that you saw. And of course, it's often blamed on competition for water or other natural resources, but there's far more to it than that. There's an overnight whipping up of hate, which seems to concur pretty closely with when the Brits arrive.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's move on to Green New Deal and the EU. Now, of course, a week or so ago, we were reporting on the European Commission adopting its new package of green proposals to deal with climate, energy, land use, transport, tax, and so on. And we were highlighting the fact that, if you remember, they were proposing exempting private jets from whatever policy they were going to push through. They're calling this Fit for 55 because they're intending to bring net greenhouse gas emissions, as they describe it, down by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. So there's been quite a bit of pushback, however, in the last week from industry, from especially the car industry. So the French government and the Italian government have had to react. This is Euractiv, and the headline here is French President Macron meets auto sector representatives. And they're saying, they quote the automotive, it's PFA. I'm not sure whether it's an industry group or not, but it's their president, Luc Chatel, saying the EU is throwing away 100 years of European know-how and chooses a technology in which the Chinese are 10 years in advance. They're talking about battery technology for cars and so on. But here is Luc Di Maio, the Italian foreign minister, and he's gone a bit further. He's saying there's somebody in Europe who thinks that ecological transition can be completed in 2 years. Ecological transition will work only if our companies and our productive systems, but also professionals, will have enough time to adapt to transformation. Otherwise, it won't be a transition, it will be a shock. We will produce a drop in emissions, which, however, will correspond to a loss of jobs and the shutdown of companies. We're not asking to block the process of European Green Deal, but we're just calling for more time in order to be able to deal with the coming period. Well, he makes a reasonable point, but he's not still quite understanding the situation, is he? Because if we remember back a year or two, Mark Carney, who is currently Boris Johnson's advisor on climate issues, was making it absolutely clear that what he was driving for was a shock, that companies must transform themselves overnight or they will be bankrupted. There's no question about this. They've got to proceed with progress very, very quickly with the Green New Deal and the Great Reset policy, or else, and that includes any finance companies that want to fund companies that don't behave as well. So this is clearly moving forward very quickly.
Very quickly. And of course, an organisation that's not going to talk about it is our old friend, the BBC. But it's taken Russia today to poke a big, or put a big rock into the BBC pond. Very interesting series of stories which encourage people to go and read. This is the lead one from the 20th of July. Shocking leaked files once again expose BBC's insidious UK foreign policy tool. A newly released raft of government papers. Now, these have come out anonymous sources, but there's a lot of detail in the article, and I'm going to encourage you to go and read that detail and see what it's talking about. But it's revealing that the BBC has got extensive involvement in spreading what RT says is pro-London, pro-EU, pro-NATO messaging across the Balkans. And these particular documents state that BBC Media Action, the charitable arm of the BBC state broadcaster, according to RT, was embroiled in a number of clandestine operations to, quote, weaken the Russian state's influence. And of course, all of that was funded by the UK Foreign Office. So the message to the UK population is the nasty Russians are almost queuing up at the borders to invade, but now we start to see something rather different happening. So the exposure raised serious questions about the BBC's international reputation as neutral, objective purveyor of news, and what implications its murky relationship with Whitehall has for its output more widely. A further tranche of leaked files related to covert UK actions in the Balkans amply reinforces that the organisation serves as a, quote, cloak and dagger device for achieving London's foreign policy goals.
And we should just say that article was written by Kit Clarenberg.
Yes, so do read this, because this is not just a sort of casual analysis. This is an in-depth analysis. Let's have a look at some of the things that are being said. So I'm happy to label the BBC as the propaganda arm operating in the Balkans, but of course they're using their charity as the soft front end. That's the soft power being used. But what are they up to? Media capacity building, reform and change management. That's quite in your face. So we've got reforming institutional structures, a Montenegro state broadcaster, RTCG. We've got working with the Macedonian media to effectively cover elections and, quote, act as watchdog. That smile, the thought of the BBC making sure there was an even hand in elections. Support the development of Bosnia and Herzegovina's public broadcasting system. Targeting youth audiences in 5 Balkans countries with an innovative multi-platform media project aiming to build young people's capacity for civic participation. And what Russia Today noted, quite rightly, is that viewers were directed to offline activities to translate awareness into action for change. And Russia Today said, and again, I think this is quite correct, it's strongly suggesting that stirring teenagers to activism was the overall program's ultimate objective. And I think that's very, very clear. I've got a bit more, and then we'll bring Alex in to comment on this one. So here's Serbia. What was going on? Well, from 2007 to 2017, 4 large-scale projects, such as a challenging undertaking with Radio Television Serbia. That was over 2 years to assist in its transition from state to public service broadcaster, and working to, quote, professionalize 5 local radio stations to develop their capacity to hold local government to account. This is some charity, Mike.
So this is what, BBC-ifying the local media?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely. And this one here, the organisation also delivered a huge 3-year project for the European Union, which, quote, strengthened media capacities for improving objective public information about all aspects of EU integration. In other words, it assisted in the production of pro-Brussels propaganda. The words in the text in yellow there, obviously from Russia Today itself. Vital work indeed, considering Serbian citizens remain by far the most sceptical about bloc membership. And we've got this one here, a statement from RT: with the troublesome Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia now irrevocably smashed into pieces, Whitehall needn't threaten the use of military force to compel Balkan media outlets to transmit pro-Western propaganda. It simply dispatches BBC staffers to their offices under the bogus aegis of promoting media diversity, free expression, democracy, civic participation, and fostering debate to ensure they remain acceptable instruments of public information. So a lot of sarcasm in that particular paragraph. We've got a little bit more to cover, but Alex, Russia Today absolutely hitting the business, the nail on the head, because we have warned, as I'll show in just a moment, that BBC Media Action is used as a propaganda arm of the BBC and the state. But this is absolutely in your face.
I think the key there, Brian, was the embedded BBC image that you showed, because the text that went with it is supporting independent media in the Eastern Partnership countries. Which organization puts the former communist countries that aren't in the EU into the bracket Eastern Partnership? It is the EU itself. It's an EU term, right? The BBC is taking an EU perspective, or the two organizations are taking the same perspective. People, if you want to look at the history of this in one person, Georgia is the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, of course, is one of the best performing EU NATO aspirants, and so we can add a third organization to that triumvirate, which is BBC aspirant country. And some of its journalists, like Natalia Antelava, who 10, 15 years ago was the main BBC woman in her own country of Georgia, got so good at this game